Okay, one sec. Just waiting for. Facebook is always lagging behind here. For some reason, more so now. Don't know why. Oops. Wait a sec. Aha. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, it's lagging a bit. Okay, we're live now. Hi everyone, we are here with Kenny Belvin, who is a new signer of Candidates with a Contract, and he is running in New York's 16th district against Elliot Engel. And Kenny just had a 2-hour Reddit question and answer session. So you're ready to go for more questions. So if anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat and we'll try to get them answered for you. So I will let you start just introducing yourself and what made you decide to run.
Yeah, so hi everyone, thanks for having me on. So I am running here in New York's 16th Congressional District. By trade, I am a political organizer, so I've done a lot of organizing work in the past 3 election cycles. And so I'm from Westchester County, New Rochelle, New York, to be specific, if any of you are also Westchester folks out there. And, you know, New York 16 encompasses the North and Northwest Bronx, or parts of it, and then southern Westchester County. So we're talking Yonkers, New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, all the way up through Rye, and like I said, the North and Northwest Bronx. So New Rochelle is where I'm from, proud product of New Rochelle Public Schools. I went to college in upstate New York. SUNY asked me if there are any fellow Lakers out there. I did organizing work in Oswego County, where I went to school. I worked on a mayoral race there, and then I did organizing work in Westchester on a state Senate campaign, and in 2016 with Bernie. I was actually a delegate candidate for Bernie in 2016, which was the first time I ever saw myself on a ballot, which was exciting, but also really weird at the same time. And then in 2018, I spent the last couple months of 2018 actually away from New York. I was in North Carolina doing field Democratic there. Is that where you're from?
Well, that's where I am now. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that was an experience. It was great, and I met a lot of really great volunteers, great people, great organizers.
But where organizing were you? Where?
I was organizing in Durham.
Oh, okay. Yes, right down the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so met a lot of really great people, ended up being a field organizer and helping lead a union fight against North Carolina Democratic Party, which was a whirlwind. Wow. But came back to New York right after the election, and, you know, just in thinking about all the people that I had met, volunteers, candidates, other organizers, felt like there was something missing in our politics. I feel like there are perspectives that we miss. You know, I think young people don't have a proper voice in politics. I think queer people don't have a proper voice in politics. I think people of color don't have proper voice and representation in politics. And I think one of the things that I hope to do with my campaign is to talk about that more, and how different perspectives to different issues are good, and Washington is really missing a lot of those. And then I also think my experience as an organizer will really help bridge some of the gap that we have in Washington, where it's just a select few are having a conversation amongst themselves without any concern for what people are actually talking about at home in their district. So having that background of being able to talk to people and see what they're concerned about instead of lecturing them about what I think they should be concerned about is definitely like a priority of mine, and something that I hope our campaign will be able to achieve. So that's, in sum, a little bit about me and some of my organizing work. I'm happy to talk about issues that I find really important, my platform.
Mm-hmm. So what
Also
specifically, were there any particular issues on the candidates with the contract that got your attention more than others? I mean, I'm assuming you're anti-corruption, and I know you're anti-big corporate money funding your campaign, that sort of thing. But anything specific that spoke to you more?
yeah, so one of the things that really basically jumped out of the page at me was I think it's in the later part of the contract where it talks about ensuring that politicians are working at least 40 hours a week. Mm. That I think means so much and I don't think enough people talk about that. Mm-hmm. And I think lately we've seen, or I think we've been exposed to a lot of talk about how people in Washington spend a lot of their time making calls to donors and not actually going to meetings or constituent meetings or talking to voters like they should be. Right. And, there was that article, I think it was in the New York Times, don't quote me on that, a couple weeks ago. And it talked about how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is often one of the only people at her committee meetings. And that's what are you doing there if not going to your committee meetings?
Right.
Meeting with your constituents or, whatever it is. And if the answer is, oh, well, I'm fundraising. Well, that's great, but that's not what we elected you to do.
Right. That's not their job. Right.
Yeah. Your job is to legislate, not to raise money. So do that on your own time. And so that part of the contract to me was really, it was like, yes, this is something that doesn't get enough, I think, conversation and definitely more. Yeah. Politicians should be working at least 40 hours a week and fundraising does not count.
I remember Barney Frank being quoted on video at one point saying, well, the other side's doing it. We have to take this money. We have to do this fundraising or we can't compete. And we're just so far away from representing the people. It's sad, but corporate media is going to give those candidates airtime. And unfortunately, the lobbying is still, I was reading an article earlier about the recent, the 737 MAX, the Boeing planes that were grounded, and just the political ties and how that played a role in delaying that, grounding the planes. But, there are all these loopholes to, I think there was a loophole in a law in the 70s that basically the government contractors can set up a super PAC and kind of get around that. And that's people's lives. It's just, I don't know what the answer is, but a coalition of candidates that are willing to fight back, I think is really the only answer. And, that's why we've been doing what we're doing. We've learned a lot, and I talk a lot about election integrity. I won't get too into that tonight, as I said before we went live, because Ray Lutz, who is a fantastic election integrity expert, was on last night, but we ended up talking for 2 hours. It was a little long. And unfortunately, I realized today that I think we need to hire somebody to do little animated cartoons, like Schoolhouse Rock kind of style, to explain the voting machines and how all of it works, because it's very dry and very boring. But I do want to point out one thing. I noticed that, so in Broward County, it was a video, I was actually there when this video was recorded, where they showed the cellular modems were in the voting machines. I don't know if you heard about that. But that particular machine is in your district. So if you go to verifiedvoting.org, you can look up your machines in any county where you live, the candidates, anybody can look it up. And so it's the ES&S DS200 is the machine. And I believe it was in the Bronx.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, not Westchester County, but the Bronx. So so those are there, and the EAC has been made aware, and they know, and they say, Yeah, those shouldn't be there, but those are voluntary guidelines for the machines. So, anyway, I think a good answer to this problem might be to get maybe candidates could have like a dedicated person on their campaign that followed the stories on election integrity and maybe helped to get more public awareness on it because it is really just overwhelming all the information about it. But you've got board of elections officials that are maybe not straight up bribery, but some stories where the voting companies were paying for trips for them and stuff. I believe that was in New York's first district that happened. So there's a lot to cover on that, and I just thought of that today. Like it might be a good way to sort of stay on top of it, but not bore people to death. Is have have one person dedicated on your campaign, an investigative journalist type person that could maybe report on that stuff. Be
yeah, I mean, I think that definitely would be really interesting. I mean, if nothing else, you want to give the people who are going to vote for you the best idea of how they're supposed to do that, right? So even if that's the end goal of this is how you vote, you have paper ballots, you have certain voting machines that require you to do X, whichever,
right.
the best way to keep people informed about the process in their area is better, right? Because like you even just touched on it before, like voting machines that we use in the Bronx are different than the ones we use here in Westchester. And this district covers parts of the Bronx and Westchester, yet people who are going to be voting for one seat are made to choose, or not made to choose, but are being given two different machines to use to vote. So I think it's a good point, and I think just being able to educate voters in that way is definitely.
Yeah, it's very confusing, and there's a lot of distrust, rightfully so. And, one thing people say is, oh, it's not good to talk about it because then you might suppress votes more because people think, they can't trust the machines. But I think the best thing is to just shine a light on it. So.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, with the way voter turnout is in this country already, concerns about suppressing the vote are real, and there are attempts by politicians to find ways to suppress the vote, but talking about how we vote I don't think is going to be the thing that does that.
Right. And speaking of which, yes, we need more voter turnout, and I believe those are the voters that will elect candidates like yourself when they hear people that don't just sound like the run-of-the-mill politician.
Right.
And I mean, one of the things that I talk about a lot is that in the last primary in New York 16, just about 24,000 people voted. So 24,000 Democrats came out to vote in the last primary. There are almost 250,000 registered Democrats here in this district. So
wow.
230,000 people stayed home.
Wow. Yeah.
That to me is so mind-boggling, right? 90% of the electorate of the Democratic base said, I'm going to stay home. And for our campaign, I think that's where we start, right? So many people. Right. And in the last primary, there were 4 Democrats on the ballot. So 4 different candidates. None of them were able to drag out 90% of the electorate. And I think if we can talk to those people, why aren't you voting? What do you care about? What do you think people aren't addressing? And I think if we can get through that, then I think we'll be in a better place. I think I think campaigns a lot target regular voters and people who vote in every election, and that's good sense, and I understand it. But in just kind of throwing away people who don't often vote, you almost purposefully exclude them from the process just by default.
Right, exactly. So, what were the biggest question or the most common questions you had on your Reddit thing that you just did?
Yeah, so a lot of the questions that we got were about issues that I think are really important and how I plan to tackle them in Washington. Basically, like what are your top issues that you hope to go
Mm-hmm.
Congress with, and there are excuse me, there are a lot of issues obviously that we have, but just to kind of knock off some of my top ones, I think the cost of college
Mm-hmm.
and student debt.
I read that on your website. So I myself dealt with that. I mean, I'm 47 and okay, there you are.
Sorry
I'm
about that.
47 and I only got rid of mine 2 years ago.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and that was with some help. So from family. So, I mean, it's getting worse and worse and it's the next crisis, I think. It's the next bubble to burst because people
Yeah,
just cannot pay those loans.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's $1.5 trillion
Mhm.
in student debt, and it's spread amongst 50 million people in this country.
Mhm.
$1.5 trillion is it's a number that I think a lot of people can't even like postulate. Um, and this is a crisis that we can get out of, but it's one that we have to get out of sooner than later.
Mhm.
And if we continue to ignore it and let it
Mhm.
fester and oh well, somebody will figure this out eventually. Just
Well,
like climate change, no,
right.
nobody to
Well,
there.
it's affecting people's ability to buy a house or buy a car, put money back into the economy. They're just strapped with this debt. And one of the biggest problems I have with it is just the fact that you can sit there and rack up so much interest on these loans. And I think some things have changed a little bit for the better, like as far as the income contingent plans. My understanding is they're a little bit more realistic.
Yeah,
But, 10, 15 years ago, it was, they'd come up with this formula like, oh, you can afford whatever, $800 a month. And I don't know where they were getting their numbers from. But, yeah, and then, you don't have many options to put it in, on hold if you can't afford right then. And then you're racking that compounding interest. And that's how people get like even further in the hole. So I think, I mean, geez, at the very least, we should have it be without interest. But definitely, public colleges and universities
yeah.
should be tuition
I'm,
free.
yeah, I mean, at a minimum, the government definitely shouldn't be making money off of
No.
going to college and having to take out loans to do so.
Mm-hmm.
That's I feel like that's pretty cut and dry and simple, right? People
Mm-hmm.
are going to college because that's the bar that we set now. It's
Mm-hmm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
college to be able to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But now if you're going to college to get a degree, here's $37,000 in debt to go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck.
Well, one of the conservative arguments I've heard against this is I've heard people complain like, well, the colleges keep jacking up the tuition, and then they're building these fancy buildings, and they're doing all this and that with the money. And so I guess that's something we have to look at too. I mean, they've got a pipeline to this money but it's still, again, it's on the backs of the students. They're the ones that are
Yeah,
going to owe it. So,
yeah. I mean, I think one of the bigger problems, especially with public colleges and universities, is that in the last 2, maybe 3 decades, we've seen such a chronic disinvestment in public education.
Yes.
mm-hmm.
At
Oh,
all
yeah.
levels,
Yes.
particularly in higher education, and just even if you think about that just plainly and logistically, if states are spending less on education, the gap has to be made up somewhere. So
Right.
Mm-hmm.
the college's mind, they say, well, we have to charge students more.
Mm-hmm.
If I am the state legislature and I say, well, we've decided to invest less in public schools, now we have to have people pay more to make the difference. You're right, it goes on the back of students. So you're right, we should make, at a minimum, public colleges tuition free. I think one of the bigger arguments that I want to see get more play, and one of the things that I would hope to push for, is making them debt free, because tuition free is a great proposal, and tuition is a big part of paying for college. But in New York, it's only a quarter of the cost of a year of college. So you get $6,000 off the price tag for a year, but you've also got to pay an additional $18,000 somewhere. And that's not realistic for a lot of people.
Right. Not to mention textbooks and cost of living. And this really stuck out to me from one of the debates between Bernie and Hillary, is where she says something about, well, I worked through college, and it was so out of touch because, you're not going to pay for your rent or anything with, a newspaper route. I mean, let's get real, it's just astronomical. And then depending on where you are, the rent, as we learned in recent studies, a minimum wage job can't even pay for a one-bedroom apartment in most places in America. So how are you supposed to go to school and take care of that at the same time?
Right. So, the cost of college has grown out of control, and I think making these institutions debt-free would be a really good step forward. And there's been legislation in the House in recent years to do that. And I enthusiastically support proposals like that. I'm a little bit upset that my opponent does not. But, one of the things that I really want to focus on, and I'm sure you saw it on the website, was canceling student debt. It's something that I think has gotten a little bit, we've seen it in a little bit more news articles lately than we ever have before. But it's not, the people I talk to when I say, nope, you're okay. When I talk to people about canceling student debt, their first reaction is, well, that's $1.5 trillion. That's a lot of money to get rid of student debt. And that's true, but we just spent that same amount of money giving the wealthiest people on the planet a big fat tax cut. So I'm not even going to entertain the idea that it's unachievable, because it is. That money,
obviously it is.
Yeah, and they poofed that money out of nowhere. It was like, oh, Amazon? Yeah, here you go.
No problem. Right.
Or military spending. I mean, it's the same thing.
Right. They never ask where that money comes from. That money just comes right out of thin air.
And isn't that funny how we have this disconnect where it's like any other thing people want to do, it's always, how are you going to pay for it? But with that, it's just like this other compartment over here. Nobody asks, Yeah. It's just
ridiculous.
And the funniest thing to me about, the proposal to cancel student debt is that would actually generate money back into the economy.
Right.
Because
yes, exactly. Yes.
You say, be able to move out, start businesses, get apartments, whatever it is.
Right.
Canceling student debt is a good proposal for the economy.
Huge.
Endless wars is not.
It's not.
Tax cuts for the wealthy are not.
No.
That proven time and time again. And yet we pursue one set of policies over another.
Yeah. Right.
And honestly, it flies in the face of fact, even. There's evidence to suggest that investing in education and in social welfare programs is good for the population and good for the economy, but we choose not to do that. And it's because, to touch back on the point of this conversation and the point of candidates with a contract, because lots of people are bought and paid for by companies who, defense contractors, pharmaceutical industry, etc. So
I think there's power in numbers, because, I often hear people say, well, how are you possibly going to go into this system and fight it and win it? And I think it's true that, having one lone candidate, Ocasio-Cortez managed to do it and is, I think, doing a pretty good job. But it's not easy. But if you have power in numbers of all these candidates banding together and agreeing, signing a contract, we're not going to take corporate money. We're committed to representing the people. I think that has a chance. It's still a huge battle. It's very much an uphill climb, and I think most of the candidates that we interviewed last year, they knew, and not to be negative about it, but they knew that they probably were not going to be successful their first run. But it's they're looking at it for the long game, and I think most are probably going to be running again in 2020. And we haven't. I think people are kind of taking a break right now, but it's great to have a new candidate to talk to. But I mean, I think all of those great candidates that we spoke to, were inspired by Bernie's campaign, and they really have. It's fascinating to hear, and it just tells you that it's really reflective of what the people want, because the candidates are saying the same things about the same issues over and over and over. It's so that's got to be a path forward that can win. I think it's just everybody banding together.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that we've seen in recent years, from 2016 through now, is that regular people, working class people, are stepping up and saying, "I do this, right? I can run for office. I can
right,
or a state legislator or a congressman or a congresswoman, and I don't have to be a lawyer or have 30 years in public service." And I think that's one of the best parts of this conversation that's come out, because yes, the voices of people with experiences, those are good, and they give us valuable insight into how the process works, but the process kind of ruined everything, right? We knew muddled up in how the process was supposed to work, what was supposed to happen, and we forgot, I think, along the way, what it was actually supposed to mean for everybody else outside of the Capitol.
Right.
And I think if we just got more regular people who actually had to live with the policies that we pass and enact into office, we would see real change really fast. When during 2016, when we were having a very long debate about the minimum wage and how that should rise and if it should rise, someone, and I have no idea who it was, but someone said, if members of Congress made $7.25 an hour, the minimum wage would go up tomorrow. And that's right. These people are kind of covered in a bubble that they don't ever have to step outside of.
Right. And then once they're in it, I mean, let's face it, a lot of them go over to lobbying or whatever, it's a revolving door, and then, that's the system. So yeah, it's going to take more than one candidate fighting back. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think the push there is just showing that, if one candidate can do it and display that it's possible, then another candidate can do it, and two candidates can do it, 4 can, 8 can, and if we start to push that snowball down the hill, hopefully at the end of it will have swelled into this massive movement of everyday people running for office all over the country and just trying to establish a set of norms and challenges that we face out here in the real world and how to fix them.
Well, so you're the incumbent, Elliot Engel, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that voter turnout was really bad. So that shows you there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm for him. So, I mean, that's a good sign, I guess, for you.
Yeah, and I mean,
even though you're up against big money and...
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that those two things combined mean for me, the low voter turnout and his accepting of big money, is just that I have a lot of to knock on, and I'm going to go through more than one pair of sneakers to get through the end of this race, and that's okay with me. Like I said before, I'm an organizer, so knocking on doors is pretty much what I'm used to.
Right, and that's where it's really going to change, is on the ground and talking to people in your community, because you are going to, I mean, I don't think one of the candidates, was anybody on I guess Tim Canova was on, Fox News, and when the for the ballot destruction stuff that happened. But I don't know that any of other CWAC candidates were on mainstream media. Maybe not the big national. That some got local coverage, in their area. But go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that, one of the things about knocking on doors and talking to folks that I think is the most exciting is that you get to hear what they really care about, right? Like, so I can go to the door and say, my name is Kenny Belvin, I'm running to be your congressman. Some of my key issues are canceling student debt, a Green New Deal, single-payer healthcare, ending influence of corporate money in politics. And they may say, oh, well, I'm really passionate about the fact that it takes me 2 hours to get to work, even though I take the subway. And that seems weird, right? And so we can get into a whole conversation about infrastructure and how the wealthiest country on the planet, in the largest city in that country, the metro system shouldn't have some of the worst on-time performance systems.
No, it's ridiculous. I think it was actually Joe Biden that said something about traveling and our airports being like some of the worst in the world.
And it's crazy. And like I said, and that's what's good about it, right? Everybody has this is my top issue. Criminal justice reform is my top issue. Women's rights, LGBTQ rights, that's what I want you to focus on. And taking all that perspective, it's taking the perspective of 220,000 people who didn't come out to vote in a primary and trying to figure out why and what will activate them into doing.
Right. I take it Elliot Engel is not knocking on doors.
I would be very, very surprised to learn if he was.
Right. So you mentioned you did get a couple of questions, foreign policy related, on your Reddit. So what kind of things were people asking? You would cut spending, or?
Well, a lot of the questions were about how we should be approaching foreign policy, and I think I said in one of the responses that it's a little bit ironic that this question comes on the anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, and we need to do much, much better than that. And I grew up with the war in Iraq. Like it's pretty much all I remember, right? I was 6 on 9/11. And so I grew up with Iraq being in the news, and then it was Afghanistan, and then it was both, and then it's just swelled into chaos in the Middle East. We did, right? Hundreds of thousands of innocent people in the Middle East are gone, and it's our fault. And I don't think people say that enough, right? Politicians talk about, oh, well, we can't be involved in these never-ending conflicts anymore. And that's definitely true, but we need to own up to the role that we played in causing these conflicts.
Right.
Even when we talk about immigration now, and when the president refers to asylum seekers, women and children coming to the border as a crisis, we did that. We did in Latin America cause this.
Absolutely.
And we don't talk about that. So first, I would love to see us own up to our own mistakes. And then I would like to see us learn from them. It's okay to be involved in the world. I don't propose that we become an isolationist society and just say, nope, it's just going to be us over here. You guys are okay over there. We've been the most powerful country in the world for a very long time. We can leverage that in a way that promotes peace and diplomacy, where the first reaction to every problem is not, oops, some people have to die now because you have something that I want, or I'm going to lie my way into a conflict that's never going to end. And we shouldn't. And it blows my mind that I grew up in an America where that was just, where it was like, oh yeah, we're just at war.
Well, I guess I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, if you were 6 on 9/11, it's always been there, and it's always been in the backdrop. And I think really just not enough people understand what you just said, that, we caused a lot of that. And I think it's by design, the media doesn't cover things in that way, and so people don't understand.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also that everyone is struggling so much that your nose to the grindstone and paycheck to paycheck. You can't really be worried about what's going on halfway around the world, I think, is a lot of people's mentality. But I think as more and more people kind of in your generation, I think especially, comes to understand it, how all those things are interconnected, and how those actions on our part, we're spending all this money on wars that we could be spending here to fix things. And then we're causing all these problems that, if you keep digging, it's at the root, it's us. So yeah. I take it you might be pleased when have you heard Tulsi Gabbard come out and say things about regime change wars and stuff? I haven't heard any other Democratic candidates running other than her be so outspoken about that, and that she was in war, so she would know.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely has a unique perspective, I think, over a lot of people who talk about the way we engage in conflict. But I think that, if nothing else, I appreciate how that starts a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
A candidate like Tulsi Gabbard talks about not wanting to engage in regime change. I think it's, at the bare minimum, starts us on, yeah, regime change is bad. We have engaged in activities that have caused regime change, or we have sought regime change in countries that are not our own, and have a responsibility to own up to that. So yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate that it puts something into the conversation and says, this is our fault. Now what? Right, where do we go from here? And I think the answer to that question requires a lot of honesty, right? It's, do we need to be spending upwards of $800 billion a year on the military? Where is that money going? Right. And who are we protecting ourselves from, right? We have wide swaths of people in this country who are disenfranchised from their right to vote. We have a criminal justice system that intentionally profits off people being put in prison for in non-violent offenses. We have a healthcare system that puts profits over the interest of patients, and we're just kind of watching as the climate is collapsing around us. So we're doing this to ourselves, right?
But the recurring theme is money is corrupting all of it, and Congress people that are representing the big money and not people. So I would imagine also that healthcare, that's a huge, you hear that a lot when you're knocking on doors. Is that always a top issue? And I think that's something that is, that's a nonpartisan issue, really. It affects everyone. Now, people disagree, but I think usually when you dig deeper and get past the buzzwords and the talking points that each side sort of, you'll hear on the right always, well, you don't want to have the government get in between you and your doctor's, decisions. Well, right now it's United Healthcare and Cigna and Blue Cross Blue Shield and all the rest of them that are doing that. What's the difference? So I'd actually love to see that, like, anytime you hear that talking point, is to just insert private health insurance company in there. It's the same thing.
One of the things that, and I actually got asked about this on Reddit too, was about, Medicare for All. And since 2016, Medicare for All is definitely, mainstay in the Democratic Party. It's that tagline is what won Democrats back the House in 2018. But now there's a debate about what that means and what that looks like, right? Some candidates are like, oh, we're going to do a Medicare buy-in or a public option, or what did Beto call it the other day? Medicare for some. No, he didn't say Medicare for some. Something like that. The proposal is single payer, but I think we should all just be super clear about it. It's
yes,
a healthcare system that has one payer, the government, so that nobody has to worry about how to pay to go to the doctor when they get sick, and doesn't put in the way. Government is not getting in the way of your care. It's you can go to the doctor and it is paid for. That's the whole secret. And one of the things I said in response to the question on Reddit was that I think Democrats have been awful at having this conversation.
Yes.
I think they've been awful at framing the narrative, right? Because Republicans are just Medicare for all. You're a socialist. You're a communist. You're anti-American, and I don't care about all of that noise. What we should be doing is framing the debate to say single payer healthcare is good for the country. It's good for businesses because now they're not having to pay healthcare costs for their employees, and it's good for workers because now workers don't have to be trapped in jobs that they hate because they fear losing healthcare for themselves or their families, right? And that is good for the economy. And I don't really know that I hear many Democrats say, "Oh, well, healthcare is good for businesses." It's always, someone on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, or a conservative politician saying, "Oh, well, it's going to cost a lot of money, so we can't do it." Sure, it will cost the government money. That's the point. It will save businesses money. It will give workers better control over their lives, better control over their care, and it will stimulate the economy in a way that
absolutely
the system doesn't. And to me, that seems like a very simple. Yes, we should talk about it in that way, but we're not. And I think, among other things, I think that's something that bringing fresh blood into the Democratic Party could do is frame the debate in a different way.
I think ultimately it's just they're answering to their donors. I mean, and if they know that has public support now. So, we've seen it with Andrew Gillum and Kamala Harris. And I mean, it's going to happen over and over again with all of them, I think, is that they're going to try to say it in a way that leaves wiggle room for them to get out of it. That's how it looks. But I remember hearing right before the 2016 election, it was on NPR, and it was a reporter was in the rural part of the state, in the mountains, and was going and talking to people that own small businesses, and they were furious about Obamacare, and a lot of them had voted for Obama and were voting for Trump. This is just reactionary, but because they said, look, Obamacare has tripled the premiums. I can't even afford it for myself, much less to provide it for my employees. So, yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that we forget is that Obamacare originally was a Republican proposal.
Yes, it was.
Yep.
I really did like Barack Obama as a person of color. I appreciated seeing a black president, and I think he did a lot of really good things. But that proposal was a Republican proposal, original thought, and that's what we got.
Right.
And I'm not gonna say that it didn't do good in some areas in
pre-existing conditions.
Yes, and expanding the amount of people that we have covered in this country. I mean, that's absolutely true, and I don't want to take away from that. But we've still got
penalized. I mean, you probably heard this. There are people not happy with that you have to pay a fine or whatever. For that if you don't buy in.
Yeah, but it also still leaves tens of millions of people uninsured.
Right.
Yes,
tens of millions underinsured.
Yes.
So it doesn't surprise me that people are unhappy with what they've got. And like you said, it's not outside of buzzwords. It's not a partisan issue, right?
No, you just have to break through all those buzzwords. And right. Well, so what's some of your ground game plans? I think it's great you've got such an early start. Do you plan to? Are you going to hopefully make some rounds on independent media? What do you have? What are your plans for your campaign so far?
Yeah, so we definitely, definitely looking forward to making the rounds in the media, independent media, local media, the whole nine. Mm-hmm. We've been actually a couple times in this area on the radio, and then we were on TV once, but that was like a small news clip. But it was still really cool to see myself on TV. And I think the biggest advantage about us starting so early is just being able to put in all the effort that it will take to start the ground game and connecting with people as early as possible. And and we learned this from Ocasio-Cortez too, right? She said I basically had to start my campaign 2 years before the election because there was just so much to do, and we're in a similar boat. There's so much work to do.
Right.
Well, you get to start getting that name recognition early on. People will know who you are. So, I mean, you're running against someone who I was looking at the districts have been redrawn. So he was he's been in office since '88. Is that right? Yeah, '88. That was in, let's see, New York's 17th, 19th districts. But yeah, that's a long time. I mean, he's kind of old news, so you should be.
I mean, his first election was 1988, and I was not even alive in 1988. I was 7 years away from being born in 1995. Is that math? Yeah.
Damn, I'm old.
So, it's just a long time for someone to be in office, and I think people can serve for long periods of time. That's not my thing, but if you serve for so long, you have to adapt with the way the country is, and he's not.
Right, and I always like to go to Open Secrets and look at all. You can just see, that site, right? You can see who all is donating to them, and you see these amounts, and it's just obscene. Raised, let's see, $1.5 million for 2018. I mean, think of what could be done with that money. It's just nauseating, and I think everyone's tired of it, really, on both sides. So
yeah. I mean, I think the influence of money on politics disenfranchises everyone. Politicians don't turn to small donors to say, "Oh, can you chip in $3? Can you chip in $5?" It's, "Oh, I'm going to have this $500 plate fundraiser. Will you over there come to that?" And it's really harmful. And I also think that when you look at other democracies around the world who don't have the same problems we do, I think the common theme in those places is that they don't have the influence of money the same way we do. And I think eliminating that, overturning Citizens United, implementing public funding of elections, simple steps that we could take to increase the will and say of the American people on our political process would do wonders. And I could say that it's sad that action hasn't been taken on this before, but there's an obvious reason why there hasn't been, and that's because the people who would vote on that proposal are accepting the money that is the problem. So I'm not right.
And I think the thing about the contracts too, I feel like, is that it also gives a way to, so let's say a candidate gets elected and they go in with every intention to do what they said they would, but then the temptation of the fundraisers and the money and all that is there. But this is kind of like a check to keep them honest and keep them answering to the people. And I think that's just one of the most important thing, and your generation is much better, I think, at staying tuned in and following up and putting their feet to the fire. I think that's the only thing that's really going to change things permanently. We can't, I think maybe Americans got a little too comfortable and we weren't paying attention and looked the other way. And that's why all these things happen. But now, you know, with independent journalism, we can learn more. If the, you know, corporate media isn't spoon feeding us this information, we can go find it ourselves. So we're a little bit more informed. I mean, wouldn't you say most people your age, does anybody even watch like corporate news? Do you think, or
I
think they get clips of it? I guess bits and pieces. So
honestly, what I think happened is that I think 2016 was a really illuminating year. I think it was an illuminating year for everybody, but I think it was a really eye-opening year for my generation in particular, because I think we're tuned into the issues and how they affected us, but I think we had been raised to believe that they would work out, and then in 2016 it was like, maybe not. And so it just threw all of us into caring about these issues. And so, yeah, I mean, I know a few people who are my age who, you know, watch news on MSNBC, on CNN. I don't know anybody who watches Fox, but you know, I also know a lot of people who prefer to read their news in mainstream media and independent media. And I think the growth of independent media has definitely been something that we've seen taken away from 2016, because I think the role of media is increasingly important now, but I also think some parts of the media failed in 2016 to properly do their jobs.
Absolutely.
And I think the more sources of news we can have doesn't harm anyone. Right.
That was the eye-opener for me. So I was a journalism major, and I was watching, you know, MSNBC, CNN. I started watching TYT during the primary in 2016. But I started closely following the election issues that were happening, you know, whether it was the whiting out things on ballots or not having enough and giving provisional ballots to all the Bernie voters. And, you know, I just started watching all of that on social media, and I kept thinking, oh, they'll cover this on the news. And then it just was never there. Yeah. And that really, to me, was the biggest eye-opener. And then, well, and being in Philly, DNC week, because now that was like surreal, because I was there on the ground and seeing what all was going on, and then would go back to Airbnb and turn on the news, and it was just, you know, balloons at the convention, and you know, it was not what was really happening. And I remember just having this moment of like, wow, this is really like pulling back the curtain, you know, Wizard of Oz moment. Like, this is staged. Like, you know, there were reports of in the convention center that they had the white noise machines on, you know, so that they couldn't hear people, the Bernie delegates, like, you know, yelling, and then there were empty seats, and they paid to have people fill them, the DNC, I guess, all these things that were happening, and none of it was reflected on the regular news, and that was just really, really weird. You know, never forget that. So I question, you really notice how, you start to realize how much the media just frames what you think, and how powerful that is to frame the conversation, manufacture consent.
What people have to look at when they're watching, particularly our mainstream news, just watch the commercials. See who's advertising. You see Boeing or Lockheed or any of these companies really start to question what the narrative is, because these are the companies paying for it.
Yeah. Well, so what do you think about having someone on your campaign? It's early on, but what would you think about, this is just sort of an idea I'm working on, and as we hear back from more candidates that are running again, I'm hoping to sort of build something where we can kind of pool information and see if there are common threads, like the same machine, you know, as in Broward County is where you are, that had the cell modem, and we could report on it. What do you think about incorporating something like that into your campaign? Like just maybe having, if you have a volunteer that is an investigative journalist type, what would you think about having someone sort of dedicated to that issue
Yeah,
to
I
cover
mean,
it?
I think it's an interesting idea. I will say it's not one that I had thought of like up to this point yet, and part of that is just because we have like it is so early, and
Right,
so
right,
the infrastructure that we have and staff that I have is one, and
that's okay.
so
Got to
it's
start somewhere.
yeah, and so it's I'm happy with where we are right now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also like I said, it's a good idea as we move along in the campaign
Right.
and you know start kicking the tires a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
and as summer approaches and we're able to do more voter contact, things like that. um,
Right.
you know
Something to
it's
think about, and we're going to do
yeah,
more and keep. We sort of, I guess it was probably last summer that I really started talking about it and connected with some election integrity activists and experts, and then I started talking to candidates about what they could do. And last fall, really all we could recommend was to put in what's called a public records request. And that's after the fact, after the election, a lot of times after it's even been certified. So it's kind of not really getting ahead of the game. So, anyway, this is just sort of, I'm brainstorming right now, but
yeah.
thinking about like what we could do. And I think I will, continue to look at each candidate's, just see what the machines are in their district and do my own research. But I'm kind of hoping that maybe candidates might end up with a volunteer that's interested in sort of
Yeah.
working together on something like that, because that again, it's power in numbers. Like no one candidate is going to be able to fight this, is what I saw in Broward County. So I don't know how
Yeah.
much you know that story, but Tim ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and you're running against a big money entrenched candidate. So
Yeah.
you could end up in experiencing some of the same things.
Yeah.
If you
Well,
gain ground.
I would hope not, but we will watch as the campaign goes.
Be prepared. Right, right. Cool. Well, are there any other particular issues that we haven't covered that are really important to you? What specifically, what organization were you with in Durham when you were here?
So I was working with the North Carolina Democratic Party, and
Oh, okay, okay,
I
gotcha.
was their organizer in Durham.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So, anything else about that, or any other issues that?
Not that I can think of. I think we've covered, a lot of the main points. I would just tell anyone watching who feels that there's an issue that we didn't cover that you really care about. You can go to our website. It's belvinforcongress.com. And I tried to be as extensive as I could on as many issues as possible on that website, just to give people a good scope of issues. But if there's
Mm-hmm.
something that you go to our website and you see, oh, this issue that I care about isn't here, I would welcome anyone to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Go to us on Facebook, go to us on Twitter, send me a message and say, hey, what do you think of this issue? I didn't see it on your website, or I didn't hear you talk about it, and I'm
Right.
happy
You'll
to
actually interact with people that might vote for you, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Very cool.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, it was great to meet you, and I'm sure, like going forward, when we get more candidates back in the ring, we like to do panel discussions. Put the candidates together and let them talk about issues. I think that's really beneficial for people to hear. So
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It was nice to meet you
Very
both.
cool.
And
Yes.
look forward to being back soon.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, good night.
Good night, everyone.